Is there any common cause today that you think science and religion can form an alliance in serving?
Well, the first problem with what you said is you treat science as if it's a thing. It's not a thing, it's a process. It's a process of thinking about how the world works and how to falsify things, tell nonsense from sense. And that is antithetical to religion. So it's not as if you've got Russia and the United States coming together to do whatever the hell they do. It is true that there are two different ways of approaching the world. I think the question you ask misrepresents what science is. Science is not a thing. It's probably the biggest misunderstanding of science. I come here to these things to try and talk about the process of science because I think it's an important process that makes the world a better place. Otherwise, I wouldn't waste my time. And the process of science is just different than the process of religion. And the process of science works. It's changed the world.
The scientific enterprise is an active seeking out of gaps in our knowledge, seeking out of ignorance, so that we can work to plug that ignorance. But religion teaches us to be satisfied with not really understanding. Every one of these difficult questions that comes up, science says, right, let's roll up our sleeves and work on it. Religion says, oh, God did it. We don't need to work on it. God did it. It's as simple as that. We have no thrusting force pushing us on to try to understand. Religion stultifies the impulse to understand because religion provides a facile, easy, apparent explanation, although as we'll see later in the evening, it isn't really an explanation, and it prevents the further work on the problem. Now, science doesn't know everything. So it's one of the glories of science that we know what we don't know, and we work on what we don't know, try to shrink what we don't know. It's hard work. We don't cop out by saying, oh, well, if you come to a difficult problem, magic must have done it, or God must have done it. No, we don't say that. We say, right, that's a problem to be solved. It may not be solved this century. It may be solved in the following century, or the one after that. But we don't just lie down and give up and say, oh, well, it must be magic because we don't yet understand it. I would hold up Darwin as a model for the whole of science, because before Darwin came along, the whole of life, the complexity of life, the beauty of life, the elegance of life, the apparent design of life looked like magic. And everybody thought it was magic. Everybody thought that God did it. It's so complicated, it's so elegant. Now, that was the really big problem. That was a far bigger problem than the problem of the origin of life, than the problem of the origin of the cosmos. Darwin solved that problem. All scientists now know that. Darwin solved that problem, and in so doing, he provided us with a sort of parable that don't even think about giving up, because if ever there was a time to have given up, it was in the case of biology. Because biology really was a difficult problem, a hard problem. Darwin solved it. Now we have one or two other problems remaining, like the origin of life, like the origin of the cosmos, the origin of the laws of physics. No doubt there are physicists here who can point to yet other ones. Darwin provides us with a lesson that says, don't give up, because if Darwin could solve it for the really difficult problem, which was life, then we have every hope that science will solve it for the other problems in the end. And even if it doesn't, even if science doesn't solve all problems ever, that is still no grounds for saying, oh, well, magic did it.
There's lots of reasons to expect that people are hardwired at some level to look for causes where there aren't, to look for the design where there isn't. So there are natural predilections that we're hardwired into, and that's what science tries to overcome. Those natural predilections to believe in that coincidences are significant, to check them, to check your own work. In fact, the easiest person to fool is yourself. And as scientists, I don't know how many papers I've seen people almost produce saying, I discovered something wonderful, but then if they're good enough, they check it and find out it wasn't. It was just an accident. And so I think it's not unreasonable. It's a natural human tendency.
So where science is filled with doubt, skepticism, willingness to learn, openness to correction. Faith is exactly the opposite.
Incidentally, scientists are the people who are really good at saying, I don't know. They say, I don't know all the time because they're terrified that some specialist is going to be in the room who knows so much more about what they've been asked that, you can almost never get a scientist to weigh in on anything but his most narrow area of specialization. Notice the fact that science is paying a price for this, in that fundamentalists are really good at using the candor of science against it. I mean, whenever scientists say, I don't know, on Larry King Live, therein rush 1,000 fundamentalists, giving us the God of the gaps there. And that's really what intelligent design is. It is politics and religion masquerading as science.
There are no rule makers in science. There are no authorities. That's the hallmark of science. There's no such thing as a scientific authority. There are scientific experts. But the lowliest student can in fact disprove any. There's no chief scientist. There may be a chief rabbi, there may be a pope, but there's no chief scientist. We say, oh, what's the answer? How should we behave? That's the key facet of science that makes it so wonderful, is that there are no authorities. Now, of course, scientists, although many people wouldn't realize this, are actually people, and therefore they have all the same foibles as anyone else, and they're scientists who abuse their science as well as every other aspect of their life. But the key aspect is there are no rule makers. Human freedom eventually arose with the enlightenment of knowledge, and in fact, open questioning, which is the hallmark of science. The hallmark of science is that nothing is above question, including God. And the minute we make certain things sacred and not subject to question, we demean ourselves and we stop thinking.
I think most of human history and most of myth and religion has been a question of refining our understanding of things we can't control. So when our ancestors were alone and without any building or farming yet as being an idea, we were hunter-gatherers, as the phrase is, their children looked at their mothers and fathers and they said, what is it that pushes leaves out of trees? It's something that's beyond our control. I know if I pick a stone up, the stone is picked up. But what is the power behind a leaf coming out of a tree? Happens every year. What is this fire that comes out of a mountain? What is the water that drops out of the sky? These are things over which we have no control. And so it's very natural that our ancestors gave them personality. It's the first thing we do. It's as much art and literature as it is religion to make a story out of these forces. And so you name a god of the mountain that roars fire, you name a god of the clouds and the thunder, and you have a god of nature and of growth and the harvest and one of decay, and you make rituals out of it. But then slowly you begin to understand them. And each one that you understand, the god disappears.
Every day we challenge our beliefs. That's how science works. Most people think science works the other way around. But in fact, what you want to do when you come into work every day, if you're a scientist, is you want to prove all your colleagues are wrong. We have to challenge our beliefs every single day. That's what science is all about. There are no scientific ideologies, and in fact, the reason science had progressed and theology hasn't, the reason we have video cameras and lights and medicine and make our lives, and we can feed more people and live longer, healthier lives, is because science changes. The great thing about science is there are no unshakable truths. We force the way we view reality to depend upon the evidence of reality. So if you don't challenge your beliefs, you're never learning. You're never questioning yourself. And so I hope that every student who ever goes to university at one point in their life has the opportunity to have something that is at the heart of their being, something so central to their being that if they lose it, they won't feel they're human anymore, to be proved wrong. Because that's the liberation that science provides. The realization that to assume the truth, to assume the answer before you ask the questions, leads you nowhere. And that's why science has led to a modern world where, in fact, we can make progress.
Science is the one language game we are playing where we get really straight and rigorous about what constitutes evidence, where there's a process of peer review, where you have a lot of smart people trying to prove you wrong, and where you actually win points by proving yourself wrong. And this is not what religions are up to. Religions are not falsifiable in this way.
Religion is really not merely the opium of the people. It undeniably undermines the intellect and rationality, and thereby harms society at its core.
If we want to understand our situation in the world, along with these deeper possibilities, we have to do it in the spirit of science. All we have is human conversation to capture these possibilities. We can either have a first century conversation as dictated by the New Testament, or a 7th century conversation as dictated by the Quran, or a 21st century conversation that leaves us open to the full wealth of human learning.
The world needs to wake up from its long nightmare of religious belief. And anything that we scientists can do to weaken the hold of religion should be done, and may in fact in the end be our greatest contribution to civilization.
To start off with a thought experiment, imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago. You're a tiny little Australopithecine afarensis, little brain. Your name is Lucy. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? If you think that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error in cognition. You've a false positive. You thought the wind was connected to something and it wasn't. A was connected to B and it wasn't. So that's a false positive, but that's relatively harmless. But if you think that the rustle in the grass is just the wind and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early before reproducing. And we are the descendants of those who are most likely to make type 1 errors, false positives, versus type 2 errors, false negatives. That is to say, why can't you just stay in the grass and collect enough data to get the answer right? And the answer is that predators don't wait around for prey animals to collect more data. That's why they stalk and sneak up on their prey animals, so they can't get enough data. So we evolved the propensity to make snap decisions and make one kind of error more likely than another kind of error. And that kind of error, that false positive, that's superstition. That's magical thinking. That's assuming A is connected to B. It's a true pattern and it isn't, and you're wrong. That's the basis of finding false patterns like gods. Now, what's the difference between the wind and a dangerous predator? The wind is an inanimate force. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent. And his intention is to eat me, and that can't be good. So what we also do, in addition to finding these meaningful patterns, is infuse in them agency. That is, it's alive, it's real, it has intention, and its intention is not good, so I better assume it's real. And this is the basis of animism and spiritism and polytheism and monotheism and the belief in angels and aliens and demons and spirits and poltergeists and gods. Gods are invisible agents who run the world, who control things, who create these patterns, who are these patterns that we use to explain things. All cultures everywhere in the world have created God beliefs. Gods with these that are intentional agents.
Human civilization began by putting purpose and intelligent purpose behind gods associated with the sun, the moon, the planets, the wind, the earth, the oceans. It's been, by one estimate, over 1,000 different gods throughout human history. Mars, god of war, Poseidon, Thor, all the rest. And the really important thing is that all of you are now atheists regarding those gods. The only difference is it's just one that we may disagree about. But 999, we all agree, have been thrown out. And the reason they've been thrown out is they've been buried by the rise of our physical understanding. Science works. And the fact that science works has buried the gods of the wind and the sun and the moon. Farmers now, as I was just saying, when it doesn't rain, they don't pray for rain anymore. They go see a meteorologist. And that's a good thing. In the process, the human condition has improved immensely, and it will continue to improve as science continues to bury the one remaining God. The point is that our current understanding of nature has changed. We've learned things. It's changed and developed since the claims were made by Iron Age peasants who didn't even know the Earth orbited the sun. And therefore, it's natural that science is inconsistent with those claims based on ignorance. And we shouldn't revere those ancient claims as sacred. They're ignorant. And the other thing that's important in this extra God is there's nothing special about Jesus that's any different than the other gods, or any other fictional heroes for that matter. First of all, there's no empirical evidence that he was divine. None, not one iota. In that sense, he shares it with every other god that's ever been proposed. The myths associated with Jesus are associated with all the other myths, and the Bible. The flood myth, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written well before the Bible, exactly the same. The hero of the Bible was asked to create an ark and put all the species 2 by 2 on 7 levels. Same thing. Virgin birth, nothing special about Jesus. Oh, look at all these. They're all supposed to have been born of virgins. The whole story, in fact, take Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, versus Jesus. It's exactly the same. They were both born from a virgin mother. They were fathered by the King of Heaven. They returned from the dead. They transformed water into wine. In fact, they, talked about eating and drinking the flesh and blood of the Creator. They were taken as a liberator of mankind. That story has been told over and over again, and this is just one of the most recent renderings. Nothing special. And the resurrection is nothing special. The myth of resurrection has been around since Osiris. Osiris was one of the major Egyptian gods, and it used to be just the kings in Egypt would be resurrected when Osiris was resurrected. But eventually, in the New Kingdom, anyone could be resurrected with Osiris. I was going to say with Jesus, but it doesn't matter. If they follow the correct religious rituals, the same nonsense. Now, the point is that the fact that these beliefs are in fact being destroyed is related to the fact that the belief depends upon not just time, not just history, and the fact is, frankly, that in the Western world at least, the number of people who have a religious affiliation is monotonically going down. But it depends on where you live. If you were born in the U.S., and you're religious, you believe in the Bible and Jesus. If you're born in India and you're religious, you might believe in Brahman and who's manifest through Gensha. If you're from the Islamic world, you think the Quran is the perfect word of God and Muhammad is the latest prophet. It's kind of interesting that your belief depends on where you're from. But what's great is we live in a world where information is becoming more freely available. And because of that global access to information, we are seeing religion go down. Because people are learning that the myths and lies that they've been taught, when they learn about the rest of the world, that other people believe other myths and lies that are inconsistent with their myths and lies. And that's why we're seeing religion dying more and more. There's still many open questions. There's a lot we don't know about the universe, a lot more we don't know than we do. That's the wonder of science. That's why I'm a scientist. But it is intellectually lazy to just stop asking questions and stop looking for physical explanations and just say God did it. That's lazy. We have evidence, reason, logic, rationality, and empirical methods on our side, whereas their opponents have vague hopes and fears. And they're arguing in favor of emotion that's hanging on for its existence by mere shreds of emotional and ideological spaghetti, much like this type provided by the flying spaghetti monster, one of the many equally irrational gods which science provides no support for. But I first want to begin by clarifying the nature of the motion, because the motion isn't science disproves God, it's science refutes God. And that's very important because you can't disprove a notion that's basically vague and unfalsifiable. There's no way to disprove the notion that God didn't create all of us 15 seconds ago with the memories of the amusing comments we heard before that. There's no way we can disprove that. Okay, that's really important to recognize that those kind of unfalsifiable notions are unfalsifiable, as I say. But we can ask, is it rational to expect that that's likely? And tonight I want to emphasize that 500 years of science have demonstrated that God, that vague notion, is not likely. It's irrational to believe in God. Now, to refute God means refuting several claims. One, that are all based on faith, not evidence. One, that God is necessary. Two, that there is evidence for God. And three, that belief is rational. And the point is that the progress of science has shown over and over and over again that the answers to all those three questions are no, 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 no. Now, my own scientific field is cosmology, and that's the study of the origin and evolution of the universe as a whole. And it's where science and religion sort of confront each other. And creation myths have abounded throughout human history, and science confronts those creation myths. Our opponents, I'm pretty sure, are going to argue first that one aspect of science that supports perhaps the belief in God is this notion that the universe is apparently fine-tuned for life. I hear that a lot. And because it was fine-tuned so life could exist, that is a remarkable and, in fact, cosmic misunderstanding. Because it's the same kind of misunderstanding that led people to believe in special creation for life on Earth before Darwin. It looked like everything was designed for the environment in which it lived. But what Darwin showed us was that a simple proposition, namely that there's genetic variation among a population combined with natural selection, meant that you didn't need supernatural shenanigans. That in fact, all the diversity of life on Earth could arise from a single life form by natural law. And he didn't know, what he showed was it was plausible based on the evidence. He didn't know about DNA, he didn't know about the details of genetic replication, but he showed it was plausible. And as I'll say, that's where we're at now as far as the understanding of the universe is concerned.
As for atheism, atheism isn't a thing. It's just a lack of belief in God. That's it, full stop. I'm also an A Bigfootist. I'm an A UFOist. It's not a belief system. There's no set of tenets. This is what atheists believe. It's just what we don't believe. We just don't believe in God, full stop, that's it. Now let's talk about something else. If you don't believe in God, but you believe in, say, civil rights, civil liberties, human rights, women's rights, gay rights, animal rights, you believe that people should be treated equally under the law, and so on and so forth, you're probably a humanist or a secular humanist or an Enlightenment humanist, but it's irrelevant. You can be a Christian and believe all those things. You can be an atheist and believe all those. It doesn't matter. So this is a complete non sequitur. This is not an argument for anything because there is no atheist worldview. I think it's very unlikely that there is a God. We can't prove that there is nothing. We can't prove a negative. But just follow a thought experiment here for a second. Over the last, say, about 10,000 years, humans have created about 10,000 different religions and about 1,000 different gods. What is the probability that Yahweh is the one true God and that Amun-Ra, Aphrodite, Apollo, Baal, Brahma, Ganesha, Isis, Mithras, Osiris, Shiva, Thor, Vishnu, Wotan, Zeus, and the other 986 gods are all false gods? So, like me, the rest of you are all atheists. Some of us just go one God further.
Has science buried God suggests that there's one God. There are lots of gods, and science has buried all of them.
A picture of a cluster of galaxies. I mean, the poetry of it, the spiritual inspiration you get from looking at a picture of a cluster of galaxies located 5 billion light years away from us, where every dot in that picture is a galaxy. The light from those stars left those stars before our sun and earth formed, which means that now many of the stars in that picture don't exist anymore. And if there were civilizations around those stars, each of those galaxies contains 100 billion stars. Any civilization that existed around those stars no longer may exist. It just opens your mind to wonder. And so I actually feel very strongly that while science per se may not provide the direct consolation, it can and it should provide a spiritual, not only wonder, but it should provide a consolation. We tell our kids fairy tales to console them. We tell and to make their life fun. We talk about Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, but then we decide that, you know what, it's better for them to know how the world really works. And it may be a little less consoling, but in fact, knowing that they're in control of their lives actually is empowering. And many of us, if you're a good parent, you want to teach your kids how to become empowered. And yet, and in religion, they often talk about the flock, the children. It effectively treats you like a child. It says it's better for you to believe a fable than reality. And often when I end a lecture on cosmology, I point out that the two things modern cosmology has taught us is that first, you're much more insignificant than you ever thought, and two, that the future is miserable. But that should make you feel good, not bad, because we are so lucky to be alive today and endowed with a consciousness where we, for whatever fortuitous reasons, on a random star in a random galaxy in the middle of nowhere, we are able to evolve a consciousness, live on a relatively quiescent planet. And so I actually think science can provide a real consolation by saying, look, once you accept reality, it's liberating.
If you invoke the God hypothesis, there's a creator did all this. Any being capable of designing particles, atoms, molecules, DNA, protein chains, cells, organisms, planets, stars, and universes can't be simple. Such a being would have to be as complex as, or more complex than her creations. Thus, by all theistic arguments for God's existence, there must be a God's God who created the Christian God. And if you continue to make that argument, then there has to be a God's God that made the Christian God ad infinitum. Now, you can't just say, well, you got to stop the causal chain somewhere, and I'm stopping it at my God. Why? You're the one who initiated the argument that there has to be a designer behind the complex system. So, who designed the designer? Well, the designer is that which does not need to be created. Why can't the universe be that which does not need to be created? Because the universe is a thing and it has to be created. Well, maybe God is a thing. No, God is not a thing. God is an agent. I'm an agent. You think I was created. So therefore, God would need to be created.
Human beings were clearly programmed by evolution to impute intentionality to the world around them. Meaning and purpose was infused in all everyday events to make sense of a dangerous, difficult, and uncaring world. So we had rituals behind the sun, the moon, the planets, the wind, the earth, the oceans, in all societies. The rise of our physical understanding has slowly caused us to do away with those many gods. We no longer have Mars, the god of war, Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, Thor, the god of storms. Everyone here, or maybe everyone, is now an atheist with respect to those gods. And there's a reason for that. Science has taught us that instead of capricious beings, there's an order to nature. And that order does not appear to involve a divinity. There's no need for a divinity. Laws of nature, describable by mathematics, make predictions that allow us to not only predict the future, but control it, without the need for any supernatural shenanigans. And in fact, it amazes me that asking the question, is God necessary, is somehow an evil thing. When we stop asking questions, that will be an evil thing. Science has taught us also that we want to believe, in the words of Fox Mulder. And we should be skeptical of those desires. As the physicist Richard Feynman told us, the easiest people to fool are ourselves. As scientists, we have to train ourselves to be skeptical of wanting to believe. And we should try and overcome our natural tendency to assume special significance to events. And human beings are also inevitably programmed to ask why, as we've heard it. But the why question is ill-posed, because it presumes purpose. It presumes the answer to the question before you ask the question. What if there is no purpose? Does there need to be purpose? And science tells us there's no evidence of purpose. So the why question is ill-posed. Our opponents want to keep the clock from ticking by avoiding the evidence of reality. And therefore, science, by telling us there's no need for purpose, has refuted the need for God.
I don't understand why it would be a simpler explanation to say that the world was created by a divine being who has existed forever than it would be to say that the universe has existed forever. It seems to me that to say the universe has existed forever is a simpler explanation. Now, your argument was that the universe actually hasn't existed forever, that science says there was a Big Bang, and this in some way supports the creationist account of the universe. All I'm saying is that science doesn't say that. Science only says the observable universe began 13-point-something billion years ago, and with a kind of a bang, and has been expanding since. That's all it says, and that's all it can say. So I'm simply saying there is no argument here to believe that your hypothesis, that it was created by a divine being, is in any better shape than the hypothesis that it has always existed.
On a point of logic, the burden of proof is on David to prove the existence of God, not on me to disprove the existence of God. I can't disprove Apollo and Zeus and all that. But we can sort of shade our probabilities of belief by the accumulative evidence for or against. the God hypothesis. There is no atheist hypothesis. That isn't a thing. Either you think there's evidence for God or you don't. And there's no alternative to that has to be defended. All of these arguments, by the way, look like this. X looks created, whatever it is, the eye, the universe, planets, DNA. I can't think of how X was created naturally, therefore X was created supernaturally. Newton has a famous quote in which he talks about the stunning alignment of all the planets in this flat plane, the plane of the ecliptic, which all the planets are going around in the same direction. They're all in this flat plane except for Pluto, which is no longer a planet, so it's not a problem. And he says, it's just I can't figure out how this could have come about. This must have been the providence of the divine creator. But no one makes that argument anymore, which is why my intelligent design creationist friends don't use that quote, because we now have a cogent theory for how solar systems are formed. Naturally. All you need is gravity and some stuff in certain right configurations of how far apart they are and so on, and planets naturally form. We now know that virtually every star in the galaxy has a planet. Completely natural. You don't have to have an intervening God to step in to stir the particles to make that happen. In the long history of science, this is what happens. People invoke the gap. They say, well, I can't think of how this could have come about naturally, therefore it must have been supernaturally. The gaps are being filled. That's what scientists do. And eventually, those gaps will be filled, and then where goes your religious faith? If you hook your faith to there's this gap here, these guys can't explain this thing here, whatever it is, the fine-tunedness of the cosmos, DNA, the eye, whatever. You can't explain that I'm hooking my, he explained it. Everyone accepts it, happened naturally, now what? Now what do I do with my faith? Okay, that's the problem.
This is a photograph from Cassini of Saturn. It's a total eclipse of the sun, a scene from Saturn. But the thing that's most amazing, and this projector doesn't have the resolution to see it, if you look at this picture, in that picture, right there, you'll see a little dot, a pale blue dot, which of course is the Earth. And it seems to me that is the wonder we should be telling your kids about, showing them pictures of understanding our place in the cosmos, the Earth, the center where all of our vital trials and tribulations and political battles and moral battles are being fought, is that little spot, that fragile spot in a dark void. I mean, that's the kind of story we should be telling to inspire our children.
Do you not find that naturalism is a sort of a bent, an angle that you're coming at, and that you allow nothing in that realm, but that you're so shut off from the beginning, nothing that ever meets the evidence?
There would be no problem for me to be persuaded out of naturalism. It's a matter of what is the model that best fits the data. Again, it is not an assumption. Some people try to sometimes say that science or naturalists start from an assumption of naturalism, so they just simply won't consider alternatives. I'm very happy to consider alternatives. I think that there was some phenomena in the world which really looked exactly like some religious tradition was saying should happen and was miraculous, was seemingly violating the laws of physics. What would scientists do in that situation? They would not say, we're not allowed to think about this because we agreed yesterday at faculty tea that the world was a natural world. I think they would try to come up with the best explanation. If the best explanation is not naturalism, then I would buy that. I will say that naturalism seems to me to be a priori simpler than theism, because naturalism has the natural world, theism has the natural world and something else that I think is ill-defined. But I didn't actually use that. I think in a proper quantitative Bayesian probability analysis, my prior for naturalism is higher than my prior for theism, but overwhelming evidence will always take care of that. I just don't think it's there. If theism were really true, there's no reason for God to be hard to find. He should be perfectly obvious, whereas in naturalism, you might expect people believe in God, but the evidence to be thin on the ground. Under theism, you'd expect that religious beliefs should be universal. There's no reason for God to give special messages to this or that primitive tribe thousands of years ago. Why not give it to anyone? Whereas under naturalism, you'd expect different religious beliefs inconsistent with each other to grow up under different local conditions. Under theism, you'd expect religious doctrines to last a long time in a stable way. Under naturalism, you'd expect them to adapt to social conditions. Under theism, you'd expect the moral teachings of religion to be transcendent, progressive, sexism is wrong, slavery is wrong. Under naturalism, you'd expect that they reflect, once again, local mores, sometimes good rules, sometimes not so good. You'd expect the sacred texts under theism to give us interesting information. Tell us about the germ theory of disease. Tell us to wash our hands before we have dinner. Under naturalism, you'd expect that sacred texts to be a mishmash, some really good parts, some poetic parts, and some boring parts and mythological parts. Under theism, you'd expect biological forms to be designed. Under naturalism, they would derive from the twists and turns of evolutionary history. Under theism, minds should be independent of bodies. Under naturalism, your personality should change if you're injured, tired, or you haven't had your cup of coffee yet. Under theism, you'd expect that maybe you can explain the problem of evil. God wants us to have free will, but there shouldn't be random suffering in the universe. Life should be essentially just. And at the end of the day, in theism, you basically expect the universe to be perfect. Under naturalism, it should be kind of a mess. This is very strong empirical evidence.
It is absolutely true that science in the Western world owes its existence to the church. Historically. Big deal. It's a historical fact. First of all, the church was the only seat of power and money, and therefore education, from medieval times, even before medieval times onward. So it was if you wanted to study science, you had to go to a university which had to be supported by the church, because it was the only seat of power and money. So the fact that there's this early connection between the origins of science and religion is historical, interesting, but doesn't say anything about science. Moreover, the wonderful thing about children is they grow up. So the church is the mother of science. But the great thing about children is they grow up, and the even better thing for some children is they leave home. Parents here who are in that situation parents here who aren't in that situation will bemoan the fact that some children don't leave home. But science originated in the only form of education there was, but it grew up. And then the questions that science asked progressed. The questions that religion asked didn't progress. Because the difference between science and religion is that we don't assume the answers before we ask the questions. We let nature tell us the answers. Science doesn't make universal claims. Science constantly changes, which is the great thing about science. As I often say as a theoretical physicist, that the two best states to be in are wrong and confused, because those mean there's something to learn. So science, by definition, evolves and changes in the face of evidence. The fact is that science is done by scientists, and scientists are human. But the scientific enterprise progresses because it does not rely on human intuition, human desire, human weakness. It relies on what works. And what works survives, and what doesn't work goes out like yesterday's newspaper. It's just the way that's what's so wonderful about it. The reason we train students in science and force them to do these incredibly boring problems that turn most people off science is to try and build up some intuition so that later on your intuition may be reliable. So that's the first thing. But the most important part of science is that we also don't trust scientific intuition. Absolutely, we try and develop scientific intuition, which often means overcoming normal intuition, because our myopic view of reality is usually wrong. But we distrust it, and that's the real key. We distrust it because we say, okay, prove it. In fact, prove it wrong. And prove it, and as Feynman said, scientists not only try and prove themselves right when they have a good idea based on intuition, the good scientists try and prove themselves wrong. And that's the hardest part of science.
Notice that Andy has not offered us any evidence for his God tonight, for his hypothesis. All he is arguing for is our ignorance of the answer to certain scientific questions. That's not arguing for a God, that's arguing for ignorance. And then, here's a gap, let's plug it with something. And maybe the God of the Bible kind of fits that, maybe. That's not an argument for a God. That's not evidence at all. There is evidence that we have some unanswered questions. We all admit that. I agree, there is plenty of evidence that there are some questions in science we don't have a clue about. Every scientist will tell you that. Well, that's what drives science. That's what makes science exciting.
Science is a process. We all can do it or not do it. I refuse to accept a dichotomy between scientists. All of us do science from the time we're children. That's how we learn. Kids put their hands in flames and discover it's hot. That's what makes us grow up and learn how to deal with the world. And one of the things I fight the most is the notion that somehow science should be the domain of scientists. The scientific process should be applied broadly to our public policy and the way we live, because it's useful and it works and it enhances our lives. But it's not the domain of a small group of people with hoods.
So unlike God, who is an artist and can't be predicted, nature is not an artist. Nature plays by the rules. Nature makes predictions. Nature provides explanations. Thank you.
Just like science and politics are intertwined, so is religion and politics. So to answer where is religion heading is to answer where is the world heading. I don't see a future where religion can be separated from culture, science, politics, power plays, everything. If I wanted to believe something, it would be that religion is heading towards where it gives less and less room for fundamentalist violence, oppression. I think that if we were to look at history and draw out the line, we would see that religion has moved in that direction, and hopefully it will continue to do so. But again, everything else will determine that also.
Imagine you're standing in Oxford, holding the hand of your mother. She holds the hand of her mother, your grandmother. Your grandmother holds the hand of your great-grandmother, and so on in a chain. The chain extends into Cornwall until it hits Land's End and can go no further. Somewhere around Cirencester, the handholders would be Homo erectus. By Taunton, they'd look like Lucy, Australopithecus. And standing on the rocks of Land's End would be the common ancestor we share with chimpanzees. Now with her other hand, the matriarch of Land's End grips the hand of a different daughter. That daughter holds the hand of her daughter, and so on. The parallel chain now wends its way along the road back up to Oxford. The two chains of increasingly distant cousins face each other along the way. And by the time the chain of daughters reaches Oxford, we have modern chimpanzees face to face with modern humans. These modern cousins facing each other belong, of course, in completely different species. They cannot interbreed. Yet, every step of the way along the chain of ancestors, round the hairpin bend at Land's End and back to Oxford, every individual is the same species as her neighbor. There is gradual change, so gradual as to be far below the threshold of perception.
Another way of trying to wrap your head around the concept of evolution occurring over a massive timescale is by imagining a picture of yourself, taken each day throughout the entirety of your life, from the day you were born until this very morning where you woke up. If you line up all the photos taken of you and look at them, each one day by day in its correct order, you won't be able to detect any differences between you one day and the photo showing you the next day. You won't be able to make a clear distinction between when you went from being a baby to being a toddler, or when you went from being a teenager into becoming an adult. But it happened gradually, just like how biological evolution throughout thousands and millions of generations have happened. So if you look at your pictures and jump 1 year each time between looking at them, you'll be able to see a clear difference. And if you had a picture of each one of your ancestors all the way back to the very first organism, and you made big leaps between looking at the pictures, thousands and even millions of generations at a time, you will be able to see a clear distinction between species. The species that we've originated from. Our family tree.
Our brains, no doubt, are the most complex things we've ever encountered. It's no wonder that many people look on us as masterpieces of design that provide evidence for the existence of an intelligent designer. But if we actually look at how life came about, through biological evolution, we find a number of features that are extremely unexpected given theism. The evolutionary process is massively wasteful and inefficient. When people create something, we try to devise the best design in advance and then build the thing according to that design. Natural selection, the main engine driving evolution, it creates by randomly trying a huge number of possible designs and then discarding all the errors. Well, this would be like an engineer who tried to build a bridge by randomly trying every possible configuration, letting it collapse until through dumb luck, one stays standing. Well, that's not design, that's crazy. Additionally, because evolution must operate by making gradual modifications to pre-existing structures, it leaves organisms with many traits that are functionally useless or even dysfunctional. Take human beings, for example. The openings for breathing and swallowing are so close together that we often choke. They didn't have to be that way. Our appendix, apparently useless, but prone to infection, sometimes life-threatening. The birth canal is too small, increasing the chances of injury, even death during delivery. The list goes on. What's more, we know that almost every single species that has ever existed on Earth went extinct. Every museum of natural history is a junkyard of failed experiments. The wastefulness, inefficiency, and imperfection of biological evolution are more likely on the assumption that it is a blind causal mechanism with no mind and limited powers than on the assumption that it is the instrument, somehow, of an all-powerful, rational intelligence. It would be surprising if such a being chose to create life in such a way.
You cannot hope to get at the truth about reality if the truth is contaminated by subjective bias. And subjective bias is precisely the name of the game when we look at today's influential stirrings of anti-scientific bias.
We start off with the belief and then we seek evidence to support it, motivated reasoning, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, and all that. And smart people believe weird things because they're really good at that. So the question is are all beliefs that are generated that way, is there a way to work around those cognitive biases? And the answer is yes, it's science. The scientific method developed over centuries for this very reason, starting with Francis Bacon saying, look, we have all these cognitive issues that cause us to distort the way we see, starting with the ore in the water that's bent, and you know it's not bent, but it sure looks bent, can't trust my vision all the time, and so on. And now we know from cognitive psychologists that, there's much we can't trust. That's why you have to have collaborators in your research. You got to have peer review. You got to have replication of studies. You got to have multiple lines of evidence coming at it, just to get our confidence up that it's not just me in my head deluding myself and I've gone down some sidetrack and I'm off the rails crazy. But I'm alone. This is why people write me with these theories of physics. Newton was wrong and Einstein was wrong, and I worked it all out in my garage this weekend, and I'll share the Nobel Prize with you if you help me with the math. You're talking to the wrong guy. I don't do the math. You go to the local high school physics teacher and talk to him. I mean, you got to get out there and see what other. So it's a social community. So science is very social, and that's what helps us get out of that problem of just generating beliefs willy-nilly and then finding evidence to support them.
These beliefs are claims about the way the world is. I mean, everyone is in the business of trying to understand the situation we're in, trying to get our behavior to move through this situation in a way that's compatible with happiness. And religion is a strategy for doing it. It just happens to be a strategy that is built to a remarkable degree upon lies and self-deception. So I argue it's the wrong tool for the job.
Then there's the accusation of arrogance, of claiming to know everything. But science is humble, has to be. We love what we don't know because it gives us something to do.
So I think Jerry is looking through the telescope at the natural world, but he's looking through it the wrong way. He's got the lens pointed this way. He thinks the universe is all about us, us, us.
If you look through the telescope the wrong way, what are you going to see? It's like, the universe was created for us human beings. What Jerry has is not a theology. What Jerry has is a meology. It's about me. It's about us. We were created. The universe is so that our species can be special. When you truly humble yourself, when you're truly courageous enough to realize that we live alone in a universe that doesn't care, then you can decide we are the ones who must care. So those are the reasons why I have an absence of a belief in any kind of a God.
Believe if you want to. Have faith in Jesus Christ if you need to. But do not make yourself vulnerable to reason and evidence. Do not demand that your belief be reasonable. You will be threatened with the loss of your faith. You may well lose your faith. Those who have lost their faith in God are generally those who have felt the need for good reasons, for evidence, for argument. Better that you should take as your slogan, Credo qui absurdum. I believe because it is absurd.
Science and spirituality are complementary, not conflicting, additive, not detractive. Anything that generates a sense of awe may be a source of spirituality. Science does this in spades. I'm deeply moved, for example, when I observe through my 8-inch telescope in my backyard the fuzzy little patch of light that is the Andromeda Galaxy. It's not just because it's lovely, although it is, but because I understand that the photons of light landing on my retina left Andromeda 2.9 million years ago, when our ancestors were tiny-brained hominids roaming the plains of Africa. So what science tells us is that we are but one among hundreds of millions of species that evolved over the course of 3.5 billion years on one tiny planet among many orbiting an ordinary star, itself one of possibly billions of other solar systems in an ordinary galaxy that contains hundreds of billions of stars, itself located in a cluster of galaxies not so different from the millions of other galaxy clusters themselves, whirling away from one another in an accelerating, expanding cosmic bubble universe that very possibly is only one among a near infinite number of bubble universes. Herein lies the spiritual side of science, the scientuality, if you'll pardon an awkward neologism, but one that echoes the sensuality of discovery. If religion and spirituality are supposed to generate awe and humility in the face of the Creator, what could be more awesome and humbling than the deep space discovered by Hubble and the cosmologists, and the deep time discovered by Darwin and the evolutionists? Darwin matters because evolution matters, and evolution matters because science matters, and science matters because it is the preeminent story of our age, an epic saga about who we are, where we came from, and where we're going.
Look at the alternative we are forsaking. The alternative is a truly open-ended, unconstrained discourse about the human experience. I mean, the fact is, people have spiritual experiences. I mean, you've used this word transcendent a lot. Who knows what that means? The reality is, it is possible for a person to close their eyes and use their attention in a certain way, such that they no longer feel separate from the universe, say. You know, they felt it was just me a moment ago, and then all of a sudden there's just the world, okay? That is an experience that is replicable, that we can all have, that many of us, I'm sure, have had. Most people, most of the time, have had these experiences in the context of a religious tradition, and they have interpreted them by the light of their religious tradition. The problem with this process is that it is not, in the scientific spirit, encouraging of rigorous honesty. It is encouraging of dogmatism and metaphysical speculation, and yes, there are diamonds in the dunghill of religion. I mean, you know, Rumi and Meister Eckhart are attesting to a kind of experience that I think we should all be desperate to have. The problem is we need to talk about it honestly, and I think the first thing you can notice about this is if a Christian is having a glorious experience of self-transcendence, and a Buddhist is having a glorious experience of self-transcendence. One thing you know for certain, the best interpretation of that data can't be that Jesus is the Son of God put here on earth to redeem our sins. I mean, it does not authenticate what the Christian thinks it's authenticating. It doesn't authenticate what the Buddhist thinks it's authenticating. We no longer have a right to our religious provincialism. We just have to talk straight.
Even as Verdi wrote his Requiem, he didn't believe in God. He didn't need to believe in God to produce that beautiful music. It isn't true that secularism can't produce a cathedral or an opera. It is true, however, that a secular civilization will have to keep what is valuable of the beauty and symmetry of religious art and devotional architecture, while rejecting the supernatural and the superstitious. You see, the supernatural and the superstitious are not the same as the numinous and the transcendent. I don't come before you, atheist and materialist as I am, as someone who simply says that Douglas Wilson and I are two competing bottles of Dr. Pepper. Nor do I come before you as someone who says I was created out of dust, or as the Quran would say, out of a clot of blood, that I'm an abject serf, that I'm a piece of nothingness fashioned out of garbage by a capricious, tyrannical God. That's even a worse insult. I'd rather be Dr. Pepper than that, I have to tell you. Me too. But now let's contrast the numinous and the transcendent to the superstitious and the supernatural. Francis Collins, Christian believer, great physician, great scientist, great humanitarian. He goes on a long hike into the mountains, and he comes to, on his hike, to a point where there's a triune waterfall, a 3-in-1 waterfall falling, and yet arrested in its fall because it's frozen. It's a frozen water trinity. He says, in his own account, he says, at that point, when seeing it, I fell to my knees, and I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal savior. Some of you may have had similar experiences, I don't know. I'm immune to this kind of thing, but I'm not indifferent to it. It is, of course, very beautiful to see a 3-fingered frozen waterfall. What if it had been 4 fingers and not a trinity? Would he not have accepted Jesus Christ as his personal savior? Let's be serious. This stuff is not true. It is superstition. It is the way the mind searches for form and will find it if it's looking for it, and looks for symbols and looks for miracles and revelations where they're not really there, and is terribly easily satisfied by tiny little bits of pseudo-magic. But if you want to be awe-inspired, ladies and gentlemen, and let me just tell you that those of us who do not believe we are divinely created, let alone divinely supervised, are not immune to the idea of awe and beauty and the transcendent. Let me invite you to look for a moment at the pictures taken by the Hubble telescope. Some of you may have done it. If you haven't done it now, or yet, do it soon. The extraordinary revelations of swirling, yet somehow beautiful new galaxies in color and depth and majesty, like nothing I think the human eye has ever seen. Turn away from that if you wish, and gaze at a burning bush in an illiterate desert part of the Middle East and say that that's where revelation comes from. I don't believe you'll be able to do it. Or read a page of Stephen Hawking on the absolute magnificence and consistency and underlying beauty. As Einstein says, the great miracle of physics is there are no miracles. It all carries on, holding together all the time. There are no interruptions in its order. There are no suspensions of it just to please Joshua or just to please some sect or tribe or group. No, it's much, much, much more impressive than that. Hawking has a colleague who looked at the event horizon of the black hole. If you could travel towards a black hole, in theory, the event horizon is the point at which the black hole is pulling everything into itself. So over into the black hole goes light itself. It's so strong it can pull light back into itself. It's really awe-inspiring. A lot more, say, than a crowd of pigs infested by devils running down a hill into the sea, which is a piece of sorcery and cheap magic of the sort that shouldn't impress any thinking person. Think about a black hole instead. Pulling the light into itself, the event horizon just reorganizing nature. So that if you could get to that lip, the lip of that event horizon, and fall in, and go in, you could in theory see the past and the future stretching before and in front of you. You would see time, except you wouldn't have the time to do it, of course, if you were a mere primate, as we are. But Hawking has a colleague who says if he knew he was dying of a terminal illness, that's how he'd want to go out, is over the lip of the event horizon. That would be majesty. That would be magnificence. That would be awe-inspiring. That would be apocalyptic. So it's in the natural world, it's in the world of science and the world of innovation and discovery and doubt. We wouldn't have discovered any of these things if we'd taken the religious story for granted to begin with. We would have said we already know enough. We know. God made this. God wants it this way. What's the need for inquiry? We already have all the information we need. The big difference between this side of the house, mine, and the other, is this. I am absolutely certain that I do not know, but that it might be possible to find out, and that doubt and skepticism and innovation and inquiry are the only means by which wonder and beauty and awe and symmetry will be discovered, and beyond those peaks we can yet see, new, more wonderful peaks will rise. Whereas, on the Wilson side of the house, it is said, we already have the certainty. We know that God created us, and we even claim to know his mind and what he wants of us. And I just invite you to open your minds to the possibility that the skeptical and the inquiring and the doubtful will be better than anything that calls itself faith. Because anything that calls itself faith calls itself certainty. And for certainty, I think there is no place in an institute of intellectual mentation and higher education. And I'm very grateful to you all for giving me the chance to say so.
Only one species knows what it is made of, atoms belonging to a known list of elements, and it knows what atoms are made of, up quarks, down quarks, and electrons. Only one species knows how to discover such things, the scientific method which belongs to all humanity. Faint hearts find it a bleak and cold conclusion that we are machines made of atoms living finitely on a rock spinning around an ordinary star hanging in a vacuum in the suburbs of a galaxy, one galaxy among billions. But the universe owes us no comfort, and there is a savage nobility in standing up to face the truth. I cannot think of a better way to enjoy our transient brush with reality than to work at understanding it. Science is the poetry of reality, zenith of human achievement, jewel in our species' crown.